So I want to bring in Anna, Celenza, and Chris, and Michael, if you can hang on, that'd be great, because we're going to bring you in at the end just to kind of reflect back on what's happening here in DC, because we want to talk locally about what's happening with the DC music community, both in terms of the sort of structural activism that's been taking place for many years, led by Chris and others, and then how they are responding in the short term to some of the data points that are reflected in your report, and kind of where that conversation is. And so Anna, Chris, thanks so much as always for joining.
Yeah, and if I can just say, first of all, Michael, I'm so impressed. I mean, like, this data is amazing. And as someone who was working on the DC music census, I think the fact that you're being transparent is wonderful. I will just say to those of you who go into something and are working with the city and to create data, don't assume that it's going to get released. And I know that a lot of what Chris is doing it's amazing work, but we could be doing so much better if the city wasn't making us fly blind. I'll just say that, and I'll try
to shooting straight. So for those of you who've not met Anna, Anna is a Georgetown University professor and a writer and thinker and activist, and a co-founder of Music Policy Forum, and been a partner in our convening work for many years. And Chris Naoum is another long-term friend and colleague who is a DC music activist, connector, scene builder. I don't even know what other things you want to claim, Chris. Telecom lawyer by day. But Chris, if you could start, talk a little bit about sort of the pre-COVID sort of activism framework in terms of the DC music community and some of your partners. And let's also give a huge shout out to Aaron Myers, who is supposed to be with us today. And Aaron wasn't able to join us, unfortunately. He had a last second emergency. But could you talk a little bit about the landscape pre-COVID and kind of how you all were working with the government and kind of what the needs were in this very complicated and quickly changing city?
Got it. Thank you, Michael. Thanks all. And thank you, Michael Seaman. That was a great presentation. First of all, happy Ethiopian New Year. It's actually Ethiopian New Year today, which is really special, and lots of Ethiopians here in DC. And yeah, I'm very sorry Aaron's not here to join me, because Aaron's been my partner in crime in working on so much advocacy for, I don't know, the past 4 years or so. So he had an emergency, so he can't be here, but he brings a wealth of information and knowledge and, advocacy, and having worked for, the Obama campaign and other campaigns in the past, and the Congressional Black Caucus. So he's amazing. We're sorry we don't have him today. So just, I co-founded this organization with a local musician who's now in Colorado, Listen Local First, to raise awareness for, the local music scene, to create new avenues for opportunity for connecting musicians with new opportunities. That took me into putting on lots of events and festivals, and that's what took up a lot of my time. But the advocacy has always been a huge part of the work that we do. And when our mayor is now in her 6th year in office. And when she came into office, she came on with a plan that really focused on meeting with the cultural community, growing the cultural community, growing the creative community. And we were there at the beginning. There was an issue with artists being displaced. DC has an amazing jazz community, go-go community, hip hop community. There's a part of the city called U Street, which is the former Black Broadway, the home of Duke Ellington. We also have our own music. Go-go, for those of you that aren't familiar, is a funk, percussion-driven music that was started in DC, and it is hugely popular. There are lots of old, historical old bands that you may have known and had major hits in the 90s, and then also tons of new bands coming up. And that's the equivalent of our version of New Orleans jazz scene, or Zydeco music in Lafayette. So there are a number of artists across the scene in every single genre that have been extremely active in advocating for spaces, for opportunities, for licensing, for permitting, for housing. And the city came up with a plan a couple years ago and introduced something that was called the Cultural Plan. And the Cultural Plan was how, in a 10-year period, can we allocate more money toward the arts? And as part of the cultural plan, they wanted to collect data, but the data they were collecting was just from having meetings in every single district and ward, and it seemed pretty haphazard. And that's sort of when Anna, Michael, and we had our the first kind of music policy summit was focused on bringing in people from the music community and having the people that were doing the cultural plan there to talk about, to give them the real data about the needs of the music community. And what that led us to, and what Anna was talking about, is the need for a census, because the city was only, in every way the city allocates money to music, whether it's through Office of Planning grants or whether it's through DC Arts and Humanities grants, it's all based on the figure that there were 300 musicians living and working in the DC area. And that's because, according to federal tax data, there is only about 350 musicians showed that their full income was coming from music-related activities. Whereas we know a lot of musicians have side jobs, they work at venues, they work at sound, they do other stuff. So it's not all, they're not all working for the National Symphony, getting paid a full salary to play music.
Well, and even if I can jump in, if you were a music educator, you got listed as a teacher. So even if you were 100% playing and teaching music, you still didn't show up on their radar. Yeah.
Right. And so that showed the need that if the city is planning to allocate money in the future toward supporting the arts at a greater level, they actually need real data on what the music community looks like. So really a lot of our advocacy has been around that, providing that information, making sure the city understands what opportunities musicians need and what's needed when you present music, because that's always just having allocating money from Metro to host musicians, but not even really pay them, just like get the permit to get a space and have musicians play for free is not a good way to, it's not a good way to support the music ecosystem. So I think that answers the first part of your question.
Yeah. So again, just to paint the picture, a community, and we're not going to go in the weeds on this, but DC is particularly complicated because of federal city and also a local community and thriving organic culture, going through massive economic development and complete transformation and very existential questions about who gets to decide what DC looks like in the future and where does music and culture fit in that. So extraordinarily complicated set of issues that a number of grassroots organizations and nonprofits, including yours, have been engaging with at both a philosophical level and a tactical level for many years. And then we swing into COVID. So how has, what has that meant in terms of the pivot for your work and what is right now, what is the call to action? What are people looking to do? How are you responding? And how are you leaning on other communities to sort of do a networked approach to say, all right, look at what's happening across the landscape and how can that be integrated into what we need here? Got it.
Yeah. So Aaron and I have been working on a number of issues over the past couple of years. Most notably, there was an issue with amplified sound in the city where the city wanted to shut down buskers. And then obviously, I think some of you are familiar with Don't Mute DC, where they tried to shut down outdoor go-go that was performing from a store, and that brought a whole campaign to make the go-go the official music of DC, and that came with lots of issues in terms of what does that mean in terms of funding. And then I helped Aaron pass the Performance Arts Promotion Amendment Act, which would give a tax credit to small venues that want to host more live music. So Aaron and I have been very active. We both had our listservs of people that we were engaging in the music community to bring together for advocacy efforts. And so when COVID hit, we combined our lists, shot everyone out, and we're like, let's have Zoom calls. And we started a twice a week Zoom call that actually became a therapy session for not just us, but musicians and venue owners, and just to be able to talk about their projects, brainstorm ideas. Immediately it was about what type of funds are available for artists, because that's the plug was pulled, and immediately artists were left without any money and income. And the ones that were performing 5 shows a week to pay their rent, you immediately saw a bunch of them leave town, go back to move with their families, go somewhere else, leave DC because they couldn't afford to pay their rent. And so what was important at that point, at the beginning, was start collecting data. Who's doing campaigns to raise money to give funds to artists? So there were about 4 or 5 campaigns, and every single week we would recap where artists can apply, what are the opportunities available. Then as time went on, it got into how can people apply for these small micro grants that were given out by the city. How do musicians get on to unemployment? One of the biggest problems is that we noticed early on is that the music community, everything from the micro grants to unemployment, a lot of artists, given that it's a cash system, the ones that are gigging all the time, they don't have their tax records from last year that show, the full amount of money they made. So when you're applying for a grant from the city that requires you to provide tax records from previous years, a lot of these jazz musicians, what we found, didn't have them and didn't have that information, couldn't apply for these funds. And then we worried automatically that was going to carry over into unemployment, because for unemployment, even though they opened up unemployment for contractors, what was that going to mean in terms of these artists that, if you have to use your 2018 tax returns, and you only submitted a quarter of your earnings on the tax return, that means the amount you're going to be able to receive is minuscule. So very early, we tried to explain to all levels of government that there are differences with the music community, and we need specific funds for the music community. And unlike many other industries, the musicians and the venues are just out of luck. There are no opportunities. And that's been the process. We've been bringing people together, again, sharing resources, trying to support people that were really in need, through doing GoFundMes and getting campaigns for them. And we then got involved in some other advocacy issues. We did a checklist for candidates that are running for office for this year to engage in the issues the music community cares about. And then over the past couple months, while we had 4 local jazz venues close. 4 of these venues closed a couple months into COVID, and it happened in rapid succession. And it's important that these were places that almost exclusively hosted jazz and soul and funk. And these are Black genres and these were places that hired Black musicians to perform. And these 4 places were crucial. They've been around for decades in the music community. So once the last one, Twins Jazz, closed 2 weeks ago, and that had been around for 33 years. And then we had to have a number of venue owners be on calls before that saying that the fiscal year starts in October, they might not make it past October. Like October is going to be the time when they're going to say, we're going to close down. And so that inspired Aaron to just draft up a quick version of a legislation that was based on square footage and had different levels, had different amounts per square footage that venues would get under 2,500, between 2,500 and 5,000 square feet, and above 5,000 square feet. And then we capped it at, we separated by licenses. So if you are a traditional nightclub, music venue, music hall, you would be capped at, you get your square footage up until $15,000 a month. If you were a restaurant with a music endorsement, which meant that 50% of your income had previously came from food and beverage, but you also hosted regular music, we wanted to encourage those people and provide funds for those people. So we created legislation that said, they would be capped at $7,500 a month. And so we framed this as the Music Venue Relief Act. We tried to push it through the council in July, but met a lot of pushback at the time because every council member was trying to get their last piece of legislation through before the recess. And so we came back together, created a campaign. It's called the Save DC Venues campaign. We gave the public the opportunity to sign on to a letter. We gave them the opportunity to write emails. We gave them a phone tree and a script to call their council members. And we launched it last week. So far, we've had over 800 sign-ons to the letter. We've had 2,000 views of the campaign, unique views of the campaign, shares of campaign information. And we are really pushing the mayor right now to act on this and act on it before federal legislation is passed, because if you wait on federal legislation, when we have a over $1 billion rainy day fund, these venues are going to close in October, and they need to know the support is coming.
Yeah.
Yeah, and if I can just jump on it, because the work you guys are doing is amazing, and the thing that sort of really upsets me to see these clubs close, and they're, like you said, they're more on the way. I mean, there are a lot that are just kind of hanging on by their fingernails at this point, and that is when we did do the census, and one of the bright spots. There were a lot of things that were struggling, but one of the bright spots was DC had a really good venue ladder. Like we had, and it was regulated, and you could really move up, and what's happening is all those bottom steps are disappearing. And so it'll just, the ecosystem's not going to work, after this, if these don't come back. And, related to that too, to bring in with Michael Seaman's work, another point of this is DC has a lot of DIY, a lot of, pop-up concerts and pop-up venues and things like that. Of course, they're all gone now, but they don't show up in the MC data, and they don't show up in Pollster and stuff. So as much as I know you were saying like San Francisco and San Jose, I wonder if the cities that have really active, in Seattle, have these big DIY sort of part of their ecosystems, it's not showing up on the radar of even losses. And so I fear in some of these cities it's even worse.
Yeah, and like, probably a lot of these restaurants that have music endorsements, I wonder if they're even showing up. And we actually proposed that legislation, the performance arts promotion legislation, to encourage more venues that were restaurants to host more live music. And that really specifically for the jazz community, like the evening music venue, jazz crowd. Because again, we've had a number over the years, there've been jazz venues, important jazz venues in DC that have closed. And like that was supposed to inspire other restaurants and places to hire more jazz artists. And it really is important that specifically for the jazz community, these were homes for jazz musicians. And now you only have the bigger venues, and you don't have the stepping stone that is needed, like Anna was saying. And I can't tell you the number of times in talking to council members and administration officials, not specifically the mayor's office, but I say, yes, and so this music census that we did, and they're like, give us the link to the music census. I'm like, well, we can't because they haven't released it yet. And so this data is really important.
And the problem is it's written and it's done, and just if you do an agreement with someone, get it in writing, because it's really frustrating. Yeah.
I want to, go ahead, Mike Seaman.
I just want to say one thing. It's Anna, you're so correct. One disturbing fact about my work is, and I talk about it in the actual report, is the informal economy for the arts is enormous, and my report doesn't address that because there's no way to really do it.
I know.
So it's disturbing. Yeah.
Although there's a way to capture it with these city by city, region by region, censuses, and we just need to do it, and we need to share. It should be open data. That was the understanding. Yeah.
So part of what I think is really interesting about this conversation is that we're crossing some different streams here in terms of, again, some sort of big picture, again, macro challenges, again, that Chris, you laid out really well in terms of a lot of where your work has been going for many, many years. And then again, you've got the short term sort of like, okay, how do we triage this crisis? And we have a really good question in from Bud Weinstein. Thank you, Bud, just asking about the viability of live jazz in clubs in general. With the idea that virtually all of them closed in Dallas before the pandemic, and that whole sort of community is struggling. And I would suggest, and Anna, you may have a sense of this, but I would suggest that a big part of the work that we've been doing pre-pandemic, a lot of us collectively, is just basically understanding where there's a disconnect between what the commercial marketplace is able to absorb, given the sort of economic structures in the music and in development and in sort of that whole complicated sort of business ecosystem. So what can the commercial marketplace support, and what is a value that the commercial marketplace as designed is not able to support, and what are the either public or philanthropic efforts to then sort of invest resources and other sort of necessities to keep that going. And that's part of the Jazz Road initiative that was led by the Cummings Foundation and the Mellon Foundation, and others. But I don't know, Anna, if you want to speak to jazz at all.
Only just to say, it is, I mean, I've been looking at a lot of data with jazz and stuff, and I don't think it's a dying art. I think the thing is, it's very much integrating into other art forms. I mean, and so it's very much alive, and a lot of these clubs weren't just doing sort of bebop, that like it's jazz, the umbrella of jazz, which brings in a lot. And I think the cities that sort of embrace that attitude to jazz are the ones where clubs can really survive, well, pre-pandemic anyway. But Chris, you've been working with a lot of these folks in DC. What is your take on kind of the survivability of the genre?
I know that the jazz community is the best organized community in DC. So I don't know how it is in other cities, but like I know that the jazz community members will get together and create a GoFundMe campaign. I think part of the issue in DC is that some of these venues that closed were so independently owned, like they've been around for so long. It's not that the venues were older, but maybe it was like the mentality was like, I'm funding this out of my pocket. We barely get by. We're not going to make it through this. We got to cut our losses now. And it's disappointing that some of these venues didn't put out the warning call to the community to try to raise funds and support, especially Twins Jazz. I mean, Twins Jazz are two Ethiopian sisters that are, in their 70s now that have owned the venue for so long. And I think that naturally they were, they were always kind of kept to themselves, and they did their thing. They hosted a great venue, but it's I feel that their natural inclination, and also they all wanted to retire, right? And their daughters moved away, so it seemed like it was just like, this is a good retiring opportunity. We're old. We're done with this. This is closing. We don't have anything else. It wasn't like well, at that point they didn't put it out to the community. But I think the community, the jazz community, is very strong, and they're organized, and I think that's I think that's what's going to save jazz. In the end.
Yeah, and I think that's what's doing it. And my only fear is that as these independent venues close because of COVID, that post-COVID we don't have just these big whales come in and eat them all up, and we have one company that owns all the venues, and then it's not really sustaining the regional culture. I mean, what was great about Twins is a lot of local players, and
I wanted to make the point real quick that we were talking about these closures, but we have examples. I mean, Katie Tutton from Chicago. Well, I've been working with the local NEVA group, the local advocacy chapter, and put together this amazing spreadsheet tracking, and it's currently being updated. It's like a presentation, but it's tracking all the funding from all the different states. Like Portland just had, $10 million fund allocated for venues. Nashville last week, it's not even on the presentation. We have $2 million allocated towards music venues. I mean, a lot of this is coming out of CARES funding, and some jurisdictions and cities have already spent all of that money. But other places are just coming up with it, and they're using their own funds, and they're using, cities are getting, yes, Ashley, we can share it. I can send it around, and Katie has said that anyone can use it, and anyone can use it for advocacy. So I'm happy to share that with you guys. But this document shows, and we have more. Hopefully DC gets on there as proposed. The council hasn't adopted this legislation yet, but it's happening around the country. Cities understand the value of music venues. They're specifically moving to fund venues, and that's what we need. Especially if you're a music venue, and especially if you have a musical heritage in your city.
Well, and I'm so glad you mentioned that, Chris. And I think again, not to be the cheerleader for 2020, because nobody wants to be the cheerleader for 2020. But I think part of what we're seeing in our community, and I do think we are a community. I think when you think about the policymakers, we have a lot of public servants participating in today's meeting, and people in a lot of cities that are putting a lot of skin in the game to build these programs and get that funding pushed out the door. And all the grassroots nonprofit, sort of activists and advocates, and people like you and Ashley Keaton and many others who are not only working locally, but are starting to network to kind of figure out how do you put those pieces together in terms of what other people are doing and how that informs the work. And then researchers, and so people like Anna, helping underwrite the DC Music Census, and Michael Seaman, and Gigi Johnson's in with us today, and a lot of just people who are, again, trying to get, like I said before, hyper granular about how do we respond not only to the 2020 moment, but how do we build whatever the better things are that we need moving forward? And what is that interconnection where it's not enough to take our ball and go home and be frustrated, right? I mean, so Chris, there have probably been about 1,000 times over the last 15 or 10 years been doing this work. We're like, I can do a lot of things in my life. I don't need this. But you find allies and partners and collaborators, many of them working for the district. There are amazing people who work for the District of Columbia that are passionate about the cultural ecosystem and figuring out how to navigate these complexities. So, I kind of leave, this conversation again, feeling like we've got to be able to be in both mindsets. One, again, being extremely mindful that this stuff is real. We have to address it. We can't ignore it. We've got to engage in the moment. We've got to rise to the occasion and figure out all the things that we can be doing collectively to try to get over the hump to what the future could look like, while also not losing sight of the fact that the future doesn't, the future is not about November 3rd, right? I mean, November 3rd is important for a bunch of stuff, but the future is what are we able to kind of collectively support? So we've had some great documents going into the chat. I think the document that Chris mentioned was blessed. Actually, Katie Tutton is on the call today. So thank you, Katie, for joining us and doing that work and all the work that you do with the Chicago Independent Venue League and the Hideout, and et cetera, et cetera. So we're going to wrap in a minute. So I just want to do a couple closing thoughts and some housekeeping. So first of all, thanks as always to Alex, especially today in the midst of fires, joining us and producing the program very elegantly. And so thank you for that. Thank you for the panelists sharing your wisdom and your knowledge and all of the work that you do, which makes this stuff possible. Thank you as always to all of you who are watching. Again, we're going to be putting this up on YouTube over the weekend. And so if you thought this was a helpful conversation that you'd like to share with your friends and colleagues, you'll be able to find it at musiccitiestegether.org/live, and it'll be there along with all the other conversations that we've had over the past bunch of months. I think everybody has put their contact information into the chat if folks are interested in doing some direct follow-up. Again, you can always reach me, Music Policy Forum, at musicpolicyforum@gmail.com. What we're going to do with this show, again, we took, I think, 3 or 4 weeks off, and we kind of went back into the huddle and figured out, is this show useful? Is this a good use of people's time? We enjoy doing it, but God knows everybody's zoomed out. So what we've decided to do is keep this going at least through mid-October. And the framework, again, today we kind of wanted to reintroduce where we are big picture and get these updates and talk about research and advocacy. We're going to start doing a series. We're going to be drilling down on what's happening in local cities, not only around reopening and the REVS project, but similar to what Chris is talking about, what's happening with closures, what's happening with local activism, what's happening with government funding. And so we're going to do city showcases, 1 or 2 a week for the next 6 or 6 to 8 weeks. And then in October, we're going to be making some announcements that we're really excited about kind of the future of our work and what we've been building kind of under the hood, really for well over a year before COVID. So we'll be doing some programming in October to talk about our recommendations for kind of this field building structure moving forward that again, we're looking forward to share with all y'all. So if you have comments, questions, concerns, feedback, encouragement, if you feel like encouragement, our email is in the chat, musicpolicyforum@gmail.com. Again, thanks to Alex, thanks to our presenters, and again, thanks to all of you for watching. We will see you next week.